Welcome to Thought Grid. Kidnapping is one of the most terrifying ordeals a person can face. It happens suddenly, often in broad daylight, and turns an ordinary moment into a fight for survival. While some victims are never seen again, the ones who do make it back carry stories that are chilling, brutal, and unforgettable. Tonight, you'll hear 4 terrifying true kidnapping survival stories, accounts of people who were taken against their will, trapped, and forced to stare death in the face, but somehow found the strength to escape. Story 1. The Girl in the Trunk. Anna was 16, the kind of teenager who was cautious but independent enough to want her own freedom. Her parents trusted her because she wasn't reckless. She didn't sneak out, she didn't hang around with the wrong crowd, and she never gave them a reason to worry. Most evenings, she'd walk the 3 blocks from her friend's house back to her own home, a short route through a quiet neighborhood of tree-lined streets and buzzing street lamps. It wasn't the kind of place where you expected anything bad to happen. That night, it was a little after 9. The sky was still holding on to a faint glow, but the sun had dropped below the horizon. The street lights had flickered to life, bathing the sidewalk in a pale orange wash. The air was cool, still carrying the warmth of the day, and the only sounds were crickets, the distant bark of a dog, and the occasional hiss of tires on asphalt. Anna walked with her backpack slung across one shoulder, her phone in her hand, earphones tucked in. She wasn't listening to anything, though. She liked having them there, an excuse not to talk to anyone if a stranger passed. The streets were familiar, almost comforting. She knew which houses had motion lights, which fences leaned slightly, and which driveways were cracked. She'd walked this same route dozens of times. Her parents always reminded her to text when she got in, and she always did. Tonight, she'd planned to do the same, get home, shower, maybe scroll through her phone before bed. But then she noticed the car. It came up behind her slowly, headlights dim, engine humming low. At first, she thought nothing of it. Cars passed through the neighborhood often, usually heading toward the main road. She shifted her backpack strap and kept walking, eyes on the sidewalk. But the sound didn't fade. The car lingered, rolling forward at a pace that matched her steps. A small prickle of unease crawled across her shoulders. She told herself not to panic. Maybe they were looking for an address, maybe just lost. She glanced back quickly. It was a dark sedan, its windows tinted. She couldn't see the driver. When she turned forward again, she picked up her pace. That's when the car surged forward and pulled to the curb just ahead of her. The driver's door opened in one swift motion. Before Anna could react, a man stepped out. She barely had time to take a step back before a hand clamped down on her arm. She opened her mouth to scream, but something rough and chemical-smelling pressed against her face. A cloth. Her lungs filled with panic. She thrashed, clawing at his arm, kicking hard against his shin, but he was stronger, heavier. The world tilted, her vision blurred, and her knees buckled. In seconds, she was dragged toward the open trunk. She caught a flash of another man in the passenger seat, watching, silent. Then the lid slammed down, sealing her into blackness. The darkness was absolute. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. The air was thick, stale, and reeked of gasoline, rubber, and the faint metallic tang of tools left behind. Her chest heaved as she tried to scream, but her voice was muffled, swallowed by the steel walls around her. The sound of the engine roared to life, vibrating through the space, and she felt the car lurch forward. Anna curled into herself, panic flooding every nerve. Her heart hammered so violently she thought it might burst. She kicked at the trunk, pounding with her fists, but the noise was drowned by the road. Tears stung her eyes as the realization sank in. No one could hear her. The car sped along, bumping over uneven pavement. She could hear voices through the metal, faint and muffled. 2 men, speaking low, but she couldn't make out the words. Each syllable rattled in her bones like a threat she couldn't understand. Minutes stretched like hours. Her mind screamed at her to fight, but fear paralyzed her. She imagined the worst, being taken somewhere remote, buried in the woods, never seen again. Her breaths came fast and shallow, the air inside heating with each passing mile. But then something inside her shifted. A thought cut through the panic. If you give up now, you'll die here. You have to think. You have to survive. Anna forced herself to inhale deeply, steadying her breath. She pressed her palms against the carpeted lining of the trunk, feeling every surface, searching. Her fingers brushed cold metal, then rough fabric. Nothing. She pushed further, pressing into the grooves, sliding her hands along the sides. Her nails caught on a small ridge, a handle. Her heart skipped. She had heard about this in health class. Newer cars had emergency trunk releases, meant for accidents or kidnappings. But would this car have one? Would it even work? She froze, listening. The men's voices were louder now, one arguing, the other muttering. The car slowed slightly, then sped up again. If she tried now and failed, they would hear. If she waited too long, she might never get the chance. Her hand hovered over the handle, trembling. She could feel its shape under her fingertips, small and plastic, like the last lifeline she might ever touch. She didn't pull it. Not yet. Instead, she let go, retreating into herself again, waiting for the right moment. Every muscle in her body screamed for release, but instinct told her, not now. The ride stretched on. She closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks, and began whispering to herself. Words of comfort, fragments of prayers, anything to keep her mind from breaking. The trunk smelled of oil and dirt, the vibrations rattling her teeth. Time lost meaning, but she kept her hand close to the latch, waiting, because deep down she knew her survival depended on that one chance, on pulling it at exactly the right time. The car rattled along the road, every bump jarring Anna's body against the hard metal. Her muscles ached from being curled so tightly. Sweat soaked through her shirt, and her throat burned from the chemical cloth the man had pressed against her face earlier. But through all of it, one thought repeated like a drum beat in her head. Wait for the right moment. She could still feel the emergency latch under her fingertips. That tiny piece of plastic was the difference between life and death. But if she pulled it too early, if the men noticed, she might never get another chance. The voices above her shifted, growing louder. One of the men was angry, his tone sharp, almost shouting. The other mumbled in response, calmer, almost as if he were disagreeing. The car slowed, then sped up, weaving onto a rougher road. Anna felt gravel crunching beneath the tires. Her pulse quickened. Gravel meant fewer cars, fewer people, fewer chances someone might see her escape. If they stopped in some isolated place, she was finished. She braced herself, her hand curled tightly around the latch, nails digging into the plastic. The car slowed again. This time it lingered. She heard the driver curse. Something about directions. The second man argued back. Their attention, for the first time, wasn't on her. Now. With all her strength, Anna yanked the latch. The trunk popped open an inch, then more as she shoved upward with her shoulder. Cold air rushed in, flooding her lungs, shocking her with its freshness. The blur of night lights streaked past as the car rolled along. For a moment, terror froze her. Jumping could mean breaking her legs, her neck, or worse. But staying meant certain death. She pushed the trunk fully open and flung herself out. The asphalt tore at her skin as she hit the road, rolling hard, pain exploding across her elbows and knees. Her backpack ripped away, skidding across the pavement. She scrambled up, heart racing, just as the squeal of brakes split the night behind her. The car skidded to a stop. Doors slammed. Voices shouted. Barefoot and bleeding, Anna ran. The world was a blur of headlights, trees, and raw fear. Her lungs burned, every step stabbing her with pain, but she didn't look back. She sprinted toward the faint glow she saw in the distance. A gas station, its neon sign flickering against the night. Behind her, she heard the men shouting, one of them yelling her name as if he'd known it all along. Tires screeched again, the engine roared to life. She ran faster, cars honked as she burst across the main road, horns blaring, tires screeching to avoid her. She didn't care. Her feet slapped the asphalt, tearing open, leaving streaks of blood. Every ounce of strength in her body pushed her toward that glowing light. The gas station door slammed open as she burst inside. The clerk froze, wide-eyed, as Anna screamed, "Help me! Please, help me!" Her voice cracked, high and desperate. She collapsed against the counter, sobbing, her body trembling so violently she thought her bones might shatter. Outside, the car had stopped briefly at the edge of the lot, headlights glaring. For one heart-stopping moment, Anna thought the men would come inside. But then, just as quickly, the car reversed, screeched around the corner, and vanished into the night. The clerk grabbed the phone with shaking hands. Calling police. He locked the doors, glancing nervously at the empty road. Anna sat on the floor, clutching her torn clothes, blood seeping from her knees, her face pale and ghost-like under the fluorescent lights. When the police arrived minutes later, she could barely speak. Her voice was hoarse, words tumbling out between sobs. She told them about the car, about the men, about the trunk. Officers noted every detail, but when they canvassed the area, the sedan was gone. For weeks, investigators searched. They checked cameras, interviewed witnesses, looked for similar vehicles. But the men were never caught. The only evidence was Anna herself. Her scraped knees, the raw cuts on her arms, and the bruises forming where hands had gripped her too tightly. When asked later how she survived, Anna always gave the same answer. "I kept thinking about that handle. If I panicked, if I froze, I wouldn't have found it. That handle saved my life, but survival didn't mean the nightmare was over. For months, she couldn't sleep without lights on." The sound of a car slowing near her house sent her into tears. She refused to walk anywhere alone. The memory of the trunk, the suffocating dark, the roar of the engine, the smell of gasoline haunted her dreams. She would wake up screaming, clawing at her sheets as though she were trapped again. Therapy helped eventually. Time dulled the sharpest edges of the trauma, though the scars never fully disappeared. Anna grew older, stronger, more cautious, but she never forgot. Even years later, she would catch herself looking twice at passing cars, her heart skipping whenever a dark sedan drove too slowly nearby. She had lived. She had fought her way out. She had beaten the odds. But the memory of the trunk remained, a reminder that survival sometimes means carrying your prison with you long after the doors have opened. Story 2. Abducted by a neighbor. In every neighborhood, there's someone everybody trusts, the kind of person who waves first, remembers birthdays, brings in packages when you're out of town. For Ethan Street, that person was Mr. Palmer. He mowed the elderly widow's lawn for free. He handed out full-size candy bars at Halloween. He fixed bikes in his garage for the kids and never took a penny. Parents waved, kids waved back. And that's how trust works. Slowly, quietly, until it feels like safety. Ethan was 10 the day it happened. A summer afternoon, heat rising off the pavement, cicadas drilling from the trees. He'd been riding his bike in lazy circles with 2 friends, a loop from his driveway to the cul-de-sac and back again. At some point, the others peeled off for dinner. Ethan was supposed to follow, but he wanted one more lap, one more swoop down the small hill by the palm-lined median. When he returned, Mr. Palmer was out front, kneeling by his flower bed, hands dirty, smile easy. "Chain squeaking again?" he said, nodding at the bike. "Yeah," Ethan admitted. "It keeps skipping. I've got a new bottle of lube in the garage." 2 minutes and it'll purr, a glance at the sky. "Beat the dinner bell." Ethan hesitated. His parents had rules. Don't go inside anyone's house when we aren't home. But this was different. Mr. Palmer fixed bikes. He fixed everyone's. Ethan had been in the open garage a dozen times while neighbors watched. He could practically see the little workbench from the street. "Okay," he said. 2 minutes. The garage door rolled up with a clatter. It smelled like motor oil and sawdust, like every dad's garage in the world. Tools neatly arranged, pegboard with hooks, a red stool. Mr. Palmer lifted the bike and flipped it onto the stand in one smooth motion, like he'd done it 1,000 times. "Spin the pedals for me," he said. Ethan did. The chain whispered. Palmer leaned in, frowning at the jockey wheel. "You know," he said in an offhand way, "I've got a better derailleur in the back. Won't fit most kids' bikes, but yours might take it. Quick swap. You'll feel like you're flying." "Really?" Ethan brightened. Flying sounded good. "In the back," Palmer repeated, walking toward a door at the rear of the garage, the one Ethan had never seen open. "Won't take a second." The door swung inward on squeaky hinges. Cool air, the smell of concrete and something metallic. Ethan stepped in after him, eyes adjusting from sun to dim. That's when the light clicked off behind them, the door thudded shut, and a bolt slid home with a sound Ethan felt in his teeth. For a breath. He didn't understand. Then the darkness folded in. When the light came back, it wasn't overhead. It was a single bulb in a cage hanging from a wire. The room was small, walls painted a dull gray, no windows. A metal table, a chair, a second door with 3 locks. On the table, zip ties, a coil of rope, duct tape, a pair of pliers, and, strangest of all, a neatly folded stack of washcloths. Ethan's body reacted before his mind could. He stepped back, stumbled, looked for the door they'd used and didn't see a handle on this side. Mr. Palmer set down a toolbox, wiped his hands on a rag, and smiled the same neighborly smile he used on everyone. "Sit," he said softly. Ethan's knees locked. "My mom, she's expecting me." "I know," Palmer said. "She always has dinner at 6. It's 5:40, plenty of time." The voice was gentle. The words were not. Ethan felt something crack inside him, a child's faith giving way to a cold new world. He backed toward the wall, eyes roving wildly. Corners, ceiling, floor. He noticed tiny things because his brain needed anything to hold on to. A drain in the concrete, a camera dome in the corner, light off, a scuff mark where a chair had scraped again and again. "I'm not going to hurt you if you don't make me," Palmer said, tone almost paternal. "Sit." Ethan sat. His palms were slick. He remembered the rule he'd been told 100 times. If someone takes you, notice everything. Make a memory trail. Survive. "Good," Palmer said. He set the bike chain lube on the table like a joke only he understood. "We're going to have some rules. You follow them, you go home. You don't. He talked. Ethan watched, a loose screw on the doorframe. 3 locks, top deadbolt, middle slide, bottom key. Palmer's keys hung on a retractable belt clip that clicked each time he shifted. A faint hum through the wall. Not a fridge. Air duct? Outside traffic? No. A mower from a neighbor's yard, thin and far, proof there was still a world outside this room. "Hands," Palmer said, and Ethan extended them. Zip ties bit into his wrists, plastic teeth ratcheting, not too tight at first. Palmer checked, tightened one more notch, and Ethan forced himself not to wince. "Bathroom?" Ethan asked, voice small, testing how questions landed. "Later," Palmer said. He set a bottle of water on the table, unscrewed the cap, and held it to Ethan's mouth. Ethan took 2 sips and stopped, leaving the bottle a quarter full. He remembered something he'd read, always leave something undone. It buys time later. The thought was wild and ridiculous and made of terror, but he clung to it anyway. He tried to track time by the hum of the bulb, by the rhythm of Palmer's footsteps crossing the concrete, by the way the keyclip clicked, in, out, in, out. At some point, the second door opened and closed, and Ethan heard the house above him, a TV sitcom laugh track, faint, running water, a phone ringing twice, then stop, the ordinary life of a neighbor who brought in packages and handed out candy bars. The first night was a smear of moments. Duct tape across his mouth, then removed for sips of water. The chair scraping. Palmer's voice telling him to be good. The light going off for stretches that felt like hours. A wool blanket thrown over him when his shivering made his teeth chatter too loud. When Palmer left him alone, Ethan tested everything. He rolled his wrists against the zip ties until they burned. He shifted his weight, listening for the chair's legs on concrete, mapping a tiny world by sound. He studied the hinge pins on the inward door, peened over, not removable. He craned his neck toward the ceiling and found the cage light's wire run through a metal conduit. No easy points. He counted breaths, counted heartbeats, counted the dents in the table's edge. Numbers steadied him. By morning, if it was morning, Ethan had learned the pattern of Palmer's steps. Heavy heel-toe. A hitch in the left knee, maybe. A slight drag. He had learned Palmer smelled like cut grass and aftershave. He had learned that when Palmer smiled a certain way, his eyes went flat, a mask slipping. "Hungry?" Palmer asked, bringing half a sandwich. Ethan nodded and made himself eat slowly. The taste of mustard was a shock of normal in a place where nothing made sense. "Why me?" Ethan asked. He didn't expect an answer. He got one anyway. "Because you came when I asked," Palmer said, and left it there like a statement of the universe. That afternoon, if it was afternoon, Palmer made a mistake. He set down the key ring to adjust something on the table and turned to the wall cabinet to fetch tape. The keys lay there for 3 seconds. 4, 5, glinting softly. In the exact center of those seconds, Ethan made a picture in his head so bright he could call it up later. The key fob was red. The deadbolt key had a notch like a little shark bite. The sliding lock took no key. The bottom key was brass, teeth jagged and short. He didn't move. He memorized. The moment passed. The keys lifted. The cabinet closed. Breath returned. On the second night, Ethan asked to use the bathroom. Palmer hesitated, then unzipped one tie and led him through the second door into a narrow cinder-block room with a metal toilet and a sink. A vent fan rattled in the ceiling. The door stayed open. Palmer stood in the frame, backlit by the single bulb in the main room, shadow long. Ethan washed his hands longer than necessary, turning the faucet on, off, on again, listening. The vent fan whined at a frequency that made his teeth buzz. That meant a duct. Ducts meant somewhere air came in and out. He dried his hands on his shirt and let Palmer lead him back, counting steps. 7 from chair to bathroom, 3 into the bathroom, 2 to the sink, 10 back. The zip tie went on again, 1 click tighter than before. On the third day, the pattern shifted. Palmer was nervous. Ethan could feel it in the staccato of his voice, in the way he checked his watch, in how often he went upstairs. The neighborhood had noticed a missing boy. Sirens had cried in the distance overnight. The world was looking. "People are going to ask around," Palmer said, almost conversational. "They'll knock on doors. If they do, you'll be quiet." Ethan nodded like a puppet. In his head, he made another picture. Front doorbell. Door chain. How long from the garage to the front? Hall? How long would a knock distract him? That afternoon, a knock came. It was light, polite, the kind that says hello, just checking. Palmer froze. For the first time, Ethan saw uncertainty punch through the mask. Palmer went upstairs. Ethan listened so hard his ears hurt. Voices at the door. A woman, Mrs. Leary, from 2 houses down, asking if he'd seen Ethan. Palmer's voice warm, concerned. "Oh no, when?" "Of course I'll look. I'll check the cameras. Yes, right away." The door closed. Palmer's steps, fast. The basement door opened. Light, keys, the chair's shadow huge on the wall. "We'll change the routine," Palmer said, eyes glittering. "Can't have you making noise." He reached for the duct tape. Ethan flinched, then forced himself still. He let the tape press his lips, let the chair's back press his shoulder blades, let the fear float across his skin like cold water. He needed Palmer calm. He needed time. That night, Ethan didn't sleep at all. He watched the bulb make a halo on the concrete. He worked his wrists against the tie in microscopic increments, not to break it. He knew he couldn't. But to feel the plastics give, to learn exactly where it bit. He flexed and relaxed, until the skin went numb. He rehearsed in his mind what he would do if he ever got one hand free. Stand slowly or move fast. Lunge for the keys or the door. Scream or stay silent. Each plan ended in a different shape of fear. He rehearsed anyway. On the 4th day, Palmer's mistake came. It didn't look like one. It looked like kindness. He brought down a bowl of cereal and a real spoon instead of a plastic one. He cut the zip tie to let Ethan eat, then, because routine had already gone favorably for him twice, set the new tie loosely while he fetched milk. The belt clip clicked. Keys on hip. The second door unlatched. The sound of the fridge upstairs opening. The soft clink of a bottle. The loose tie didn't hold when Ethan twisted his wrists hard and fast. It didn't snap. He hadn't built muscles for that, but it slid just enough for him to yank one hand free. The instant that hand was loose, Ethan didn't hesitate. He was off the chair and at the table in a single, clumsy motion, knocking the bowl to the floor where it shattered into milk and shards. He grabbed the water bottle. Not to drink, but to splash it on the floor by the door. Why? Because slick concrete changes the way shoes move. The second door opened. Palmer stepped back in, surprised to see the boy standing, one hand free. He moved, fast, but the first step hit the wet patch and his foot slid a fraction. Not a fall, Ethan hadn't been that lucky, but a stutter, a hitch. He had bought exactly 1 heartbeat. Ethan took it. He threw the metal chair into Palmer's shins with everything he had. The chair wasn't heavy, but it was enough to tangle legs for that same heartbeat. Ethan darted past him toward the garret. Door, the first door, the one without a handle from the inside, and ran his shoulder into it. Pain shot through him, bright and useless. Behind him, keys clinked. Palmer swore. Hands grabbed for him. Ethan spun, small and slippery, and went not for the main door, but for the belt clip. He didn't try to snatch the entire ring. Too heavy, too slow. He went for the retractable clip itself, fingers finding the cord, yanking, letting it whip the keys sideways and down. They hit the wet floor, skittered under the table, hit the drain with a tiny, holy sound. Palmer lunged. Ethan dove. His fingers closed around the red fob. He didn't think about which key was which. He had memorized the notch pattern the second day, and now his hand knew it better than his eyes. He shoved the shark bite key into the top lock and turned. It stuck. He jiggled. It turned. The slide in the middle he threw open with his palm. The bottom key went in, turned, and the door gave. "Ethan." Palmer's voice. Not gentle now. Something terrible inside it. Ethan didn't look back. He yanked the door and felt air, not the filtered hum of the bulb, but the real hot breath of the outside world, wash over his face. He stumbled into the garage, then into sunlight so bright it slapped him. He ran. His body made decisions his head barely kept up with. Down the driveway, not into the street, across the lawn, because grass slows grown men more than children. Over the hedge at the corner, scraping his thighs, into Mrs. Leary's garden, where she stood with a hose in her hand and horror growing on her face. "Help me," he tried to say, but the word came out as a croak. She understood anyway. The hose dropped, her arms went up. Her scream cut the afternoon in half. Doors opened up and down the block, a chorus of ordinary, blessed noise, the sound of a world that still existed. Palmer stopped at the edge of his lawn, calculating, mask half on, half off, and then turned and walked, not ran, back toward his garage. He didn't look back. Police came. The street swarmed. Voices filled the places where silence had been. Palmer didn't answer his door when they knocked. When they forced it, he was gone. The basement room was there. The chair was there. The bowl and milk and spoon were there. The drain and the locks and the cage light were there, humming softly as if they'd never been used for anything except a single bulb in a silent room. They found him 2 days later, 3 towns over, sitting in a diner booth as if he'd simply driven out for coffee. The arrest was quiet. The trial was not. Details spilled and kept spilling for how long he'd planned, how many times he'd nearly acted, how many children had stood in that open garage trusting the man with the smile. Ethan testified behind a screen. He spoke clearly, voice shaking only once when he said, "He told me if I followed the rules, I could go home." He went home. But survival is more complicated than that. Night brought sounds the house had always made, but which now meant something else. A water heater groan became a bolt sliding home. A floorboard creak became a heel-toe step. He slept with a nightlight, then with 2. He learned to live with the way a key sounded in a lock, with the way a neighbor's laugh could contain a new shape. Therapy helped. It gave names to things his body already knew. Hypervigilance, triggers, grounding techniques. He learned to feel his feet on the floor when panic tried to convince him he was back in the chair. He learned to count breaths to 10 and then to 10 again. He learned he was allowed to be safe and also afraid. Years later, the street looked the same. Flower beds, cul-de-sac, kids on bikes, a different family owned Palmer's house. They replaced the garage door, painted the trim. They didn't know what the concrete had heard. Ethan did. He walked past with friends sometimes, listening to their jokes, nodding at their stories, and he'd feel the summer sun on his skin and the old fear in his bones and know that both could live in him at once. When people asked how he survived, he told them a version of the truth. "I noticed things. I made a plan. I waited for my moment." Sometimes he added the part that mattered even more. And when it came, I didn't hesitate. What he didn't always say was that the world went on trusting, even after. Neighbors still waved. Kids still brought bikes to be fixed, though to someone else now, with the garage door open wide. The ordinary, blessed life of a street continued. And Ethan, who had learned that monsters don't always lurk in bushes or alleys, that sometimes they wave first, grew up knowing that survival is not just the moment you run into the light. It's every moment after, when you choose again and again to live there. Story 3. The Woman in the Woods. It was a late spring evening when Marissa laced her running shoes and set out on her favorite trail. She had jogged those woods countless times, long stretches of pines swaying in the breeze, the smell of damp earth underfoot, birds wheeling overhead. The path curved close to a small stream, then bent back toward the main road where her car waited. She loved it because it was quiet, and she told herself quiet meant safe. That night, the quiet betrayed her. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, leaving the forest painted in shades of gray and green. Marissa's earbuds were in, music thudding faintly, her breath steady. She rounded a bend, and that's when she felt it, that strange, prickling awareness that she wasn't alone. She slowed, tugged out one earbud, and listened. The woods hummed with insects, a bird's cry in the distance, then a snap, a branch breaking. Before she could turn, something slammed into her from behind. She hit the ground hard, dirt filling her mouth, her knees scraping raw against rocks. A man's weight crushed her down, a rough hand clamping over her mouth. Her scream died against his palm. Panic surged, but she thrashed, clawing at his arms, kicking wildly. He cursed, tightening his grip. With terrifying strength, he dragged her off the trail, deeper into the trees. Marissa fought. She clawed at his face, tore skin with her nails, twisted like an animal in a trap. But he was bigger, stronger, determined. He dragged her far enough that the trail disappeared, the canopy swallowing the fading light. There, in a small clearing littered with leaves, he bound her wrists with rope and shoved her against a tree. Her mind reeled. This is it. I won't get out. I'll never see home again. Terror clawed at her, but beneath it was something else. Anger. She was not going to die in these woods. The man paced, muttering, pulling something from his backpack. Tape, rope, a knife. Marissa forced herself to memorize everything. His height, his build, the smell of his clothes, the sound of his voice. Notice everything, she told herself. It might save you later. He turned toward her, knife glinting faintly. Stop looking at me, he snarled. Marissa lowered her gaze, but her mind kept working. The ropes cut into her wrists, but she twisted, slowly, feeling for slack. The bark of the tree bit into her back. Every breath was a battle between fear and strategy. Time dragged. The forest grew darker. Mosquitoes whined in her ears. The man paced, restless, distracted, and in that distraction, Marissa found her chance. Please, she whispered, her voice shaking. I won't fight. Just let me sit. Please. He hesitated, suspicious. She lowered her shoulders, trying to appear small, defeated. Slowly, he loosened the ropes just enough to shift her arms. It was all she needed. She waited. Her wrists burned as she tested the slack, pulling tiny increments, loosening the knot fiber by fiber. Every time he turned away, she worked faster. Her pulse thundered in her ears. Finally, the rope slipped free. She didn't wait. Marissa bolted. The forest exploded with motion, branches snapping, leaves whipping her face, the sound of the man's boots pounding after her. She sprinted blindly, lungs on fire, branches tearing her skin. She stumbled, nearly fell, but pushed on, heart hammering. Behind her, his shouts grew louder, closer. The trees broke suddenly, spilling her onto the trail. She didn't stop. She ran faster than she'd ever run, shoes slamming dirt, vision swimming. And then, ahead, light. Headlights. A car slowing as it approached the trailhead. Marissa screamed, waving her arms, stumbling into the open. The car screeched to a stop, the driver jumping out just as the man burst from the trees. For a moment, the two men locked eyes. Then Marissa's attacker turned and vanished back into the woods. She collapsed into the driver's arms, sobbing, her body shaking uncontrollably. Within minutes, police were on their way. They searched the forest for days, but never found him. The ropes, the knife, the pack, gone. It was as if he had dissolved into the trees, but Marissa survived. She carries the scars, thin white lines on her wrists where the rope cut deep, a jagged scar on her knee from where she hit a rock while fleeing. But more than that, she carries the memory of that night, the silence of the woods, the sudden violence, and the knowledge that survival came down to one decision: to fight, to think, to run. Marissa never returned to that trail. She never jogged alone again. But when asked how she lived through it, she always answered the same: I never stopped planning. Even when I thought I was dead, I was still looking for a way out. Story 4. Taken Abroad. Travel was supposed to be Emma's dream. She'd saved for over a year, working long shifts, cutting corners, skipping nights out with friends, all for the chance to see a part of the world she'd only read about in books. When she finally landed overseas, she was exhausted but thrilled. The city was alive, markets buzzing with voices, streets glowing with neon signs, music spilling from cafes, taxis honking in chaos. Everything felt new, different, intoxicating. But dreams can sour quickly. On her third night, Emma left her hostel after dark. She wasn't reckless. She carried only a small bag with cash, her phone, and a room key. She stayed on lit streets, weaving through the chatter of locals and tourists alike. When a car slowed beside her, she thought little of it at first. Drivers were always offering rides, but when two men jumped out, the world spun into terror. Hands grabbed her arms, rough and fast. She screamed, twisting, but the street was oddly empty, her voice lost in the noise of traffic a block away. Someone pressed a hand over her mouth, and she was dragged into the car. The door slammed shut, the engine roared. The city lights blurred past as they sped away. Emma fought, but a blow to her stomach knocked the air from her lungs. Dizziness swept over her. She slumped against the seat, the men shouting in a language she didn't understand. Fear rooted her in place. She thought of her parents back home, of the friends who told her to be careful, of the gut feeling she'd ignored when she left the hostel alone. They drove for what felt like forever. The streets grew darker, buildings giving way to dirt roads, then to silence. Eventually, the car stopped. She was dragged into a small building, concrete walls, barred windows, one dim light overhead. The room smelled of sweat and dust. She was shoved to the floor, her wrists bound, her bag ripped away. The men argued again, their voices harsh. She caught fragments, her own country's name, a sum of money, laughter that made her skin crawl. Ransom. That was the word that formed in her head. They wanted money. But Emma's family wasn't rich. There was nothing they could offer. Hours passed. One guard sat by the door, rifle across his knees. The other drifted in and out, pacing, smoking. Emma's fear burned so hot it numbed her, but beneath the fear, something stirred, an instinct to survive. She knew panic wouldn't save her. She had to think. She began speaking softly, asking for water, pretending weakness. She avoided eye contact, making herself seem smaller, less of a threat. The younger guard, the one who smoked, watched her with suspicion at first, then indifference. By the second day, when she asked again, he tossed her a bottle without hesitation. It was a sliver of humanity, but slivers can be pried open. She spoke to him in fragments. Simple words, gestures, anything he might understand. She told him she was nobody. She told him she had nothing. She told him again and again that if they kept her, trouble would come. Whether he believed her, she couldn't tell. But she saw the hesitation in his eyes. On the third night, the chance came. The men were distracted, arguing in the next room. The younger guard stood by the door, his rifle leaning against the wall. Emma whispered his name. She'd caught it in their conversations, and when he glanced at her, she gestured desperately at the rope binding her wrists. For a long, breathless second, he stared. Then, in a motion so quick she thought she imagined it, he loosened the knot. Not all the way, just enough. Her pulse thundered. When the arguing grew louder, she acted. She twisted free, surged to her feet, and shoved past the guard before he could change his mind. The other man shouted as she bolted through the doorway. Chaos erupted. She ran into the night, bare feet slapping against dirt, lungs tearing with effort. Shouts echoed behind her, followed by gunshots cracking the air. She didn't look back. The dirt road stretched endlessly, but then, ahead, headlights appeared. An old truck rumbling toward her. She screamed, waving frantically, stumbling into its path. The truck screeched to a halt, the driver jumping out, shouting in shock. When he saw her bound wrists and bloodied feet, his face hardened. He yanked open the passenger door, shoved her inside, and gunned the engine. Behind them, the kidnapper's car appeared, lights glaring. A chase exploded through the winding streets. The truck swerved, horns blaring, dogs barking from the roadside. Gunshots cracked again, bullets sparking against the asphalt. Emma clung to the seat, praying. Finally, with a desperate turn, the driver cut down a narrow alley, the kidnapper's car skidding past. They didn't come back. Hours later, Emma was safe at a local police station, trembling as she tried to explain through a translator what had happened. Her captors vanished into the sprawl of the city, never caught. She made it home weeks later, scarred but alive. Emma no longer travels alone. She avoids quiet streets after dark, and sometimes, in the middle of the night, she wakes with the smell of dust in her nose, the echo of shouted voices in her ears. But she survived. She ran, she fought, and she found the one moment that saved her life. And survival, in the end, is what keeps her story from being just another headline